Welcome back, everyone. I am very excited for this segment. I have the honor of having Dr. Terry Hope here with me today, and really quickly, I'm just going to read just briefly so I capture it. Terry, you are an internationally renowned expert in the field of personal business and scientific-based transformation and leadership. She holds a PhD and doctorate with advanced studies in quantum medicine, transformation, consciousness, and has published multiple scientific research studies relating to neuroactivity, anxiety, depression, and changes in stress levels and consciousness. She's been doing research on the access bars for about 12 years. And in a couple of minutes, we're going to actually show you a phenomenal presentation. But I just wanted to take a moment and introduce all of you to her, the woman behind the scenes who's putting all of this phenomenal research out, and say thank you for all of your work.
You're welcome. It's been such a pleasure and will continue to be. It's so exciting.
So what are you, in a couple of minutes, we'll see the research that you've been doing over the last 12 years, and I know that you are constantly looking at what else is possible in the realms of the brain and everything. So what are you excited about now?
Going forward, I'm excited about expanding, having people being able to see all the work that I've accumulated over this number of years, and it took a while to pull it together, and I know the impact that it will have in bringing more people in from a place of who requires to hear the research and the science behind the magic of access bars.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So this presentation that you are about to watch was first presented by Terry in Atlanta at a Bars and Business presentation for people in the wellness area of different HRs, colleges, schools. And it was a phenomenal presentation, and we had her do it again in this very room a few months ago. And if you ever needed any scientific proof that the bars are fucking awesome, this is it. So thank you again, Terry, for everything.
Thank you.
And enjoy.
So this presentation I did in Atlanta recently at a wellness conference, and it was looking at changing the face of stress and burnout. And the funny thing about stress and burnout, so burnout has now been classified as a disease state by the World Health Organization, thank you very much. And yet stress is something that we actually can't put a finger on, because every person has a different response because they see life differently. And so stress we can't actually categorize as a thing. But it is now the latest epidemic that there is in the world right now, and they're paying attention to it because it's actually impacting so many people and kind of the world. So to look at what stress is, it's really how we respond to our environment, which also means that we can change how we respond to our environment. So how are they measuring this? Mostly stress is seen in the workplace, and it's being measured in the workplace as the focal point for things. And what you'll find, this is North American statistics, because I was the closest thing when I did this original presentation, was that 80 to 94% of people are reporting that there's stress in the workplace, and they're saying that it's getting worse, not better. And 64% of people say that they've had burnout this year. And what is burnout? It's when you actually cannot function any longer. When your body, your emotional capacities, and your sense of spirit no longer can keep going. So that's a really high percentage. And 63% of all middle managers want to quit. So just imagine the workplace, in this case in the US, and I'm sure that it's mirrored other places, that you have this huge number of people that are disengaged, and how much is our society and the capacities that we have for people to be able to function well. And those people who are not opting out actually have a sense of being paralyzed. They don't know whether to stay, they don't know whether to go, they can't make decisions anymore. And this is also impacted by mental unwellness. So this is the people who are currently working, and part of those also have, either they're in the workplace or not in the workplace, 21% of people are reported as having mental illness. And 15 to 35% of people, and I suggest this is probably really a lot higher, are using substances to, I'm going to say escape, to find a way to cope. And there's a lot more in the data that would suggest that it's much higher than that. And 5% of people in the US at any one time are suicidal, which is a very high statistic. And the one that kind of got me the most was adolescent anxiety. And why would that be included here? Well, they're included in society and they're about to go into the workplace if they're not already there. And this number in 2017 was only 18%. And now it's at 32%. Have we got people who are like more aware? Are they people who are more sensitive, or has something changed in our environment? And that really brings the idea to like, what is it that's creating stress in the world? Is it that the world has become more intense? The world that we've created isn't really working. We have people who have now become aware that what's going on isn't working. And is that really contributing to the level of stress that's being reported? I don't know. And it could be all of those, and it could be more, right? So the people who are working, they say 33% say they have constant stress. And 62% say they're always under high stress. And when you look at this, it's like, is this like the story of the boiling frog? So the story of the boiling frog, if you don't know it, is that the frog is in water, and there's a low temperature water going on, and it's starting to increase in temperature, and the frog doesn't even know that its environment has even changed. And over time, the frog ceases to exist because he doesn't even know his environment is that challenged. Now, if the frog jumped into the hot water, he would know that it was hot, and he would jump out and have some sort of reaction. So my question is, has stress as an entity snuck up on us as a society? Like, has it come in the back door and we don't even notice it's going on? So stress and burnout, they impact all aspects of living. And it is one of the top contributors to disease. It's also the top contributor to mental health. So we might think that they're separate items, but actually, stress is one of the main leading causes of mental unwellness because it's where the dysregulation starts to occur. People start to have things that aren't working for them, and then they start to check out and feel depressed. So there's external stresses and there's internal stresses. And the external stresses can be like, oh my gosh, I have so much on my plate. I have a level of uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen in the world next. And I'm aware that I don't know what's going to happen in the world yet. And most people want to have a level of certainty, and yet there's this uncertainty. There's all these ideas about health and what does health look like in the future. And maybe just off the last couple of years, do we have to address health? Are we at risk? So those kinds of external stressors are kind of like always there, but they play in the background, right? And then there's our environment, the people around us, our relationships, our families. And those all can be external stressors, but we don't have to have it to impact us. And that's the really great part of it. Because if it's either internal or external, we can actually change our perspective on it. And when we look at internal stressors, that's like the self-critic. That's judgment. I don't know if any of you have ever taken a moment and went, oh, I should have done that so much better. And yet that creates a level of stress inside our bodies. People are being hyperachievers now more than ever, wanting to keep up with what's required for them in their job. And then there's these things that are like unconscious programs. So unconscious programs is like, I better be the best dad. And so there's this constant state of needing to be the best dad or the greatest wife, or I better be a fantastic parent here. And it's not cognitive, but it keeps us motivated and always on this level of stress that's going on underneath the covers, so to speak. So the other thing that comes up for internal stress is perspectives. And beyond perspective is like our point of view, but also the inability to feel that we can't change a situation can also cause stress and give us a sense of disempowerment. And those are the two pieces, and particularly that we can look at in this moment, that actually can cause stress. So stress, as it relates to thoughts, feelings, and emotion. So thoughts, feelings, and emotions, what they do, including points of view, what they're generally considered to be processed by the brain. And they are stored as energy in the body, generally because you have a point of view about it. And the interesting part is that they build up over time. So even though you had an event that was stressful when you were young, maybe traumatic or not, they tend to start building up in our physical bodies and causing a level of tension and disharmony, so to speak. And when it comes to stress in the mind, what happens is there becomes cognitive impairment. And what do I mean by that? So there's a reduction in our capacities for memory. There's like the idea when people get super stressed, they can't reason anymore. And even in a learning situation, people can no longer learn the way they could optimally learn when they are under stress. And it's part of what the mind does when things start to show up and starts to create a level of dysfunction, like with anxiety or depression, and including burnout at the bottom level of that. And oftentimes when people are trying to learn, what happens is they kind of turn off. Like they go to write a test, and all of a sudden there's this, oh, I can't do it. And they don't even remember what they were trying to do, and maybe not do as well in a learning environment as they could have. So when it looks at stress in the body, oh my gosh, don't forget the body. There's increased levels of cortisol, it changes hormones, dysregulates sleep, digestion. There's a sense of pain with a lot of people, and people have a decreased level of energy when they're stressed. Has changes in health, definitely suppresses the immune system and creates muscle tension. I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed that when you're really stressed, you have the sense of like, I just so need a massage because I'm so tense. But the funny thing is, it doesn't always solve the thing that caused the tension. Now, the brain is really interesting. Well, I like neuroscience. I trained in neuroscience, and I love stuff, everything brain. So what happens with the brain under stress is it decreases in size. In fact, brain volume shrinks when there's a high degree of stress over time. And then what shows up is these patterns of dysfunction. And over time, what happens is the brain slows down, the function slows down, and the speed at which the brain functions starts to slow down. And this also activates the stress center. So this was a piece of research that was published in The Lancet in 2017. And what they found was that people who were highly stressed, they had this high activation at this part in the brain called the amygdala, which is often the place where you have fight or flight. And what they found is that people who were highly stressed had this high activation at the amygdala. And it also, the more stressed they were over time, the more activated it became. So they become actually more sensitive to stress. The other part that they looked at is, does stress actually create inflammation? And is it a precursor to coronary artery disease and atherosclerosis? And the answer is yes. So when you have this high degree of inflammation, not only in the body, but it also happens in the arteries. And so you have this level of arterial inflammation. And then what happens, not that you need a science thing, but what happens is that all this cholesterol and plaque that's sitting flowing through our blood system sticks to these inflamed arteries. And I go, wow, we're sitting there worrying about eating French fries. like, are French fries getting a bad rap? Because I would say if we were to start to change how we are living and moving and living stressed, what would we do, or how could we have it so that this level of inflammation didn't occur to begin with? And that's just, I go, French fries, getting a bad rap. So here's my friend the frog again, and he says, so what happens if this trend continues? And what is our future going to be like if we continue on this trend, because there's not too many options that are seemingly available? And so I would say, is it time to change the cycle? So can we move from a place of stress, burnout, brain function that's dysregulated, lower cognition, memory, and having to, because all of this stuff happens in the brain, we actually have to use more effort to be able to do the same things that we used to do when we weren't stressed, before our brains started to become slower and function differently. And so all of this moves to this place of distress or stress, and overall creates a level of disease that we don't have to have. And the thing is, people talk about things like body, mind, and spirit, and as if they were separate, but they're not. They're all together. And people go and try to change stress by going, here, I'll go for a run, I'll look after my body, and now I'm going to go and do some meditation to slow down my mind so I have some calmness. Somehow the spirit fits in there somehow, but basically it's all one. So what would it be like if we could actually address all of those pieces that are all of us together? So this is basically who we are. All of these elements are the basic elements of who we are as a being. And they are the things that, when we came into this world, we all have. And yet somehow, we start taking part in the rest of the world and being responsible, and these pieces of our life kind of fall off. And what we forget is not only these miraculous beings that have all of this joy, but we also have miraculous bodies. And our body is like a symphony. There are 11 body systems. There are almost 40 trillion cells in your body, and almost 200 billion neurons, and multiple energy systems that keep all of this going. And the cool part is, if you ever doubted your body for 1 second, there are 37,000 billion chemical reactions per second in the human body. And I go, that is amazing. And it doesn't fall apart no matter what we think. So I go, it's friggin' miraculous. So we don't have to function as though we have to live in survival. In fact, we can function far beyond survival. So here's my, I like animals. Apparently today I like animals. So sharks are these miraculous beings, and they've been on the planet longer than dinosaurs have. And sharks have these innate abilities, much like human beings do. They have 5 senses, as we do, which we use for enjoyment of living, and we also use them for survival. So you can smell when the house is on fire or whatever. But sharks also have this thing about sensing. And what is sensing? Well, if there's going to be a hurricane, about 2 weeks before the hurricane ever hits, a shark knows that the hurricane is coming. And a lot of other animals like snakes and turtles have that same sense. And when they sense that, they have something's up. Well, people also have sensing. And it's kind of a weird thing to describe, but it's a thing that occurs. And it was interesting because there was a group who did a bunch of research looking at stress in the body and heart coherence. And what they found was they took these slides and they put them in front of all these people, and they did this experiment. And every so often there would be a slide that would be disruptive, challenging to the person, emotionally challenging, we'll call it. And what happened was the body responded to the stress of this negative impact 4.3 seconds prior to the slide ever showing up on the computer screen in front of them. So if we sit there and think, okay, well, that's sensing. And really, we might have a bigger sense of sensing, but that's the only time that I've seen that, you know, it's been measured. And not that because it doesn't exist because we can't measure it, because there's so many things we can't measure. So there's this level of sensing that we have, much like sharks. And then sharks also know that when all of this stuff goes on and they sense changes in the barometric pressure, they know to go to a deeper level in the ocean so that they can survive, which is probably why they've been around longer than dinosaurs. And so they have this sense of knowing, as do we. So have you ever been in a situation where you walked into a room and you went, like people were fighting in here, weren't they? And there's nothing going on, but you have that sense, like, you know, that there was something discordant to what was going on. Or have you ever been in a situation where you had a moment and went, I knew that was going to happen. Like, I just knew it. But it's not something that we can look at, we necessarily talk about, but we have these senses of knowing. And if we can be that level of presence to the world around us, then we can tap into these senses and knowing, and not really be at the effect of our environment as much as what we would perceive life to be like now. So imagine from that if you were more connected to living, and what would life be like if everyone was fully engaged and everyone in cultures and societies were more on track to what is really truly nature to them. So what would the future be like, and what's available to us? So the current solutions that we have basically are all kinds of things that we can do. Exercise, yoga, do more things, go for chiropractic, have some meditation. I put in enjoy life. That was never to be found anywhere on the internet that would actually help to improve your situation. And to me, it's like, if we start enjoying life, then we have a lot more available to us. So let's talk a little bit about empowerment. And what we know is with empowerment, we have a sustainable future. And stress actually affects empowerment. So when people are stressed, they feel less empowered. And when people have a sense of empowerment, it actually decreases stress. So what do you do about this? Uncharted territory. Ask a question. It's one of the greatest things I learned from Access Consciousness, is this idea of asking a question, from asking a question without looking for the answer. And basically, when you ask a question, it actually takes you to uncharted territory. And it's pretty miraculous. And it's not about seeking out the right answer or anything instantaneous. So let's try this. What happens when you ask a question? So I'm just going to ask you to look at something. Is there something in your life now that you go, oh, if I could only have that be different? And just get a sense of that. And what is there that's beyond the problem? So now if I ask you, what else is there that you have not yet considered in relationship to that? Does that actually create something else? So what do you sense? Do you sense possibilities? Does it actually change the energy of the situation? Do you have a sense of change of that? And actually, does it invoke the quantum field to contribute to what it is that you're looking to have be different? And I would say possibility, it inspires creativity, because as soon as you start to ask that question, your whole kind of sense of things change and becomes a creative process. Do you get a sense of empowerment, that you're no longer under the I can't change this scenario? A sense of motivation. Does it increase energy? Like all of a sudden that burden that I can't figure it out is kind of gone. And does it actually allow you to have a sense of knowing that there's a possibility that something could be different? So what is it that's beyond stress? And I kind of like this slide, particularly because everybody wants to let off steam. Everybody wants to have that sense of relaxation where they're not wound up like a tight coil anymore, trying to keep it all together. So what is possible here? What future possibilities can there be? And people are looking for lasting solutions. They no longer want the Band-Aid. They can't do the Band-Aid any longer. They want some sort of immediate result, which is probably why a lot of people are doing substance abuse. Not saying it's changing it, but some sense of relief immediately. And something that creates a level of improvement. So years ago I still do, but different, a clinical practice. And back then, the biggest part of my practice was neurofeedback, biophoton coherence, like a whole list that you can see here on the left-hand side. And one of the things I discovered was access bars. And I started doing research on a couple of things, and access bars was the one that I did the most research on. And I started that because I went to an event, one of those health expos. And my friend suggested we go and do an access bar session, and I was a little bit, I don't do that in that environment, but I'm gonna try it anyway. So I laid on this massage table for 20 minutes. And 20 minutes later, I got off the massage table, and I was happier than I'd ever been in my entire life. And I was already happy. How could you get happier when you're already happy? And there was this sense of presence, joy, connectedness to me, a sense of living that I can't really describe. But if you haven't had an access bar session yet, I would invite you to try it, and I hope that your experience is as remarkable as mine was, because truly it was remarkable. So what is access bars? Well, access bars are there's these 32 points on the head, and by a practitioner lightly touching these points on the head, it stimulates this natural response. A natural response to release energy that holds in all the things that don't serve us well, thoughts, feelings, emotions, trauma, anything that's there, and it creates positive neurological changes. And it also invokes physiological well-being. And I've heard over time the number of people who have had experiences where their actually bodies change from having unwellness to wellness. The other thing that it does is creates this deep level of relaxation. So when I looked at doing research, I looked for experiential aspects and neurological aspects, because I like brains, and looked at what is it that changed, who's the population, and were there any benefits? Basically, that's where I went. So the first piece of research that I did with a neuroscientist, Jeffrey Fannin, was that we looked at what happens to brains with access bars in what we would call the general population. There's nothing going on with them, general population, so there were 60 people, and each person had a 60-minute session. And we kind of looked for, like, what happens with the brain, and did anything happen as it related to emotional components? So what we found was that of all of those participants, 85% of the people had an increase in brain coherence. Why would that be important? Because when you have brain coherence, your brain works faster. You actually have more creativity. And according to some, you would say you have more intelligence, because I think it's not intelligence, it's more tapped into who you really are when you have this high degree of coherence. We also found that there was this interesting phenomena at 22 hertz, which is a brainwave frequency, and 63% of people had that. It also showed that people, even after the session was over, that they were still actually processing information. So the session didn't end as soon as the person's hands came off the person's head. And that was really interesting, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in brains in a minute. So the second piece of research that I looked at was I went, well, if this is going to do this in the general population, what will it do for people who have anxiety and depression? So this was a piece of research that was published in 2017, and 100% of the people had both anxiety and depression. They didn't have to, they could have had one or the other, but they all had it. And they all had trait anxiety. And with trait anxiety, it's like how you live. There's no on and off moments. It's like full on. And also, 2 people had trait depression. And one of the people was at suicide risk. So it was really interesting when I looked at the data after the research, what that kind of looked like. And there was only one 90-minute session that was given for this group of people. And all the people improved. That's highly irregular. This does not happen that everybody improves, but everybody improved. And 100% of the people had an increase in brain coherence. And I'm just going to show you this next slide that shows you the changes that happened. The slide on the left is the changes that we're seeing in anxiety, and the darker blue is the pre-scores. So that's how significant it was. And the lighter blue is the post-scores. And the chances of this actually being able to happen by chance are pretty much slim to none. So having an 84.7% decrease in average scores, that means some were even higher, and as it related to anxiety, an 82.7% decrease in depression is actually never heard of, never heard of, and particularly not in one session. So when I looked at all the other data of how else did they experience access bars, and what was shown in the results is things like pessimism, loss of pleasure, past failure. How many people live in the past and sort of beat themselves up mentally because they didn't do something well, and they stay there and stay self-critical. And all of these elements, including indecisiveness and loss of energy, changed for the majority of people in this particular piece of research. So what happened with brains? So in this group of brain maps, the top left-hand corner, you can see that there's this brain that has a high degree of red. Now that's at 1 hertz delta. Basically, when you're sleeping and generating or regenerating, that's where the highest level of activity is. Now, this person had their eyes closed, were not asleep, but they have this high level of activity at 1 hertz. The other thing that we can see on the bottom, the second one over, is 22 hertz in the center of the head. And at first, I couldn't figure out what that would be looking at the data, because it was happening in both studies where we looked at brains. So changes in activity, what we saw as it related to the brain, there was an increase in coherence in the majority of people. There was new connectivity between brain regions. Regeneration occurred. And this anomaly at 22 hertz, which is on the bottom that I was showing you, is what would be identified as a state of flow or being in the zone. So when you have, these people, not by chance, ended up with this high activation at 22 hertz, that would mean that they were actually at a high degree of focus and concentration effortlessly. That's what being in flow kind of is. And, football players train for this like crazy, so they could actually have this level of focus and concentration without using a lot of energy towards it. So that was really, to me, I went, wow, that is so cool. And so the experience for people is enhanced focus, greater creativity, and a high degree of engagement when they've had an access bar session, and this deep level of relaxation that occurs. So this is a brain map looking at one of the participants in the study on anxiety and depression. And this person, and I'm going to show you here before, anything green is normal. Anything blue is dysregulation, as in there's not enough energy or brain activity in that region. And this particular person had a score for depression and anxiety that would be close to high severe. They were also an NFL player that had a traumatic brain injury. And this was the after effect of the traumatic brain injury, and they had already received something like 8 months worth of neurofeedback to try to change this, and it didn't change. And they were also on anti-anxiolytics and depression medications to try to change the symptoms, and they were no longer yet resolved, including self-medication. So not quite there. What was interesting after 90 minutes was most of the brain wave patterns changed to green, meaning normal. So I spoke to other neuroscientists about this, like, how is that possible that you can get this degree of change? And they said, well, normally you'd have to do another 6 to 8 months of neurofeedback to get that degree of change. So this is not normal. And it's normal because if we are essentially who we are, it is normal to go to normal, to have our brains go to normal instantaneously when we're essentially being us and connected to all of who we are and our bodies. So I kind of like that slide. The other cool thing was the only takeaway from this slide. So this is looking at S-Loretta, which looks at localization, particular brain regions. And the one on the left is the before picture. And basically the focus of this area was working memory, and the person had this, was stuck in this area that's conscious recollection of the past. After the Barras session, they were actually now looking at this area that was same, different discrimination, which is kind of like, something's different here, and actually move them out of the past into the present moment. And that was them trying to figure it out, the difference that was changed, that was seen in this S-Loretta. So wow, what happens now if you look at a global population? When you have depression, anxiety, stress, and pain. And this study was done around the world. There were 10 different languages, and practitioners, all kinds of Access Bars practitioners, took part in this research. And it was quite remarkable to see what showed up. And the people in this study, they had anywhere between a 30-minute session and an hour and 20-minute session. Yeah. And what happened was that 68% of the people who had depression had a decrease in their degree of depression. There was a 69% decrease in anxiety. For people who reported stress, there was a 79% decrease in the level of stress. And voila, pain, virtually gone. So when we think about pain as being an element of energy being locked in the body, most of the pain actually dissipated for all these people. And in fact, it's like, this is looking at, did pain decrease? 58% of the people who responded who had pain actually had zero pain. So it didn't just decrease, it just disappeared. And what was interesting about this research beyond that is to look at, this is something that's very unique, that I found was unique, and was that the higher degree of intensity of what someone's experienced, so let's say they're severely depressed, normally you would expect that those people would respond to a lesser degree, because in this world, they're severely depressed, then you're going to need a lot of medication to get them down to being, or a lot of intervention to get them down to being functioning and not depressed. But what happens with, I've seen in most of the data, the higher degree of intensity, the more effective it is, the higher degree of change. And that's something that we wouldn't even expect. And another thing that was really interesting is that normally you would have, like if someone had one thing, they would respond to a certain degree. And then if you had more, like let's say you had all of these 4 things going on in your life, and you would expect that the scores would be higher, which they are. Scientifically, it showed up, yeah, the scores are higher because you have all these 4 different things. And generally speaking, you get a resistance to treatment, and it's very difficult to treat people who have more than one thing going on. But in this case, what happened, voila, There wasn't that. In fact, there was no decrease in the capacities to change from people who had more things going on than somebody who had one. So it actually shows you that when we're fully integrated, sort of like we don't have to separate things out. All things can actually change almost instantaneously, regardless of what the normal would be. I hope I had said that in a way that you can get. So the next thing I looked at was, okay, well, if that was a large population, what do we do with people who are really stuck? Like maybe they have PTSD, they have depression, anxiety, and stress. And this was a group of police officers in the UK. And they were brought to this research because they were at the end. They had tried everything. The clinical psychologist referred them to the research because there was no other place to go. They had taken every medication, they had taken every kind of thing that they would normally use. And what happened is they came to the research. So what did we find with people who had been treated with everything and were still clinically unresolved? 76% of the depression was changed. 62% of the scores decreased for anxiety. In stress, 65% of the scores decreased, so there was a 65% decrease in stress. And in PTSD, 51% of the score decreased, which is clinically relevant. And what happened was these people only had 7 one-hour access bar sessions to get this kind of result where nothing else had worked. So it was kind of what drove me to keep doing research, because I'm going, this is so incredible. Like, it doesn't even happen anywhere that you would get these kinds of results consistently. And the last piece of research that I looked at was looking at stress, anxiety, pain, and happiness. And in fact, the numbers are similar to what was done in the previous research, where you're going to find a high degree of people responding to decreases in stress, anxiety, pain, and an increase in happiness. So what we can see here with people who have had all of these challenges, where they are living in a way that is disrupted from what they would love to live as, we can see that as it related to well-being and brain activity, there's a change in flow and coherence, decreases in the amount of stress that there was, mental health change with significant symptom improvement, and a change in from brain dysregulation to brain optimization. So what future is possible if we could dissolve all the built-up stress? What would happen if we had people who were empowered and living with creativity and were receptive and relaxed and had a level of focus and concentration without effort? Could this be the new paradigm? Could this be where the nature of who we are is the nature of well-being, where we have optimal health with ease? We have brain function that actually works for us, not against us, and cognitive capacities that are decreasing right now, a level of engagement in life that we wouldn't otherwise see, and a level of being able to live unforced, being able to be as miraculous as we are in a way that doesn't require more effort. So we're not living in a world that it's a continually declining way of living, and have peace and focus. And wouldn't all of us like to have a level of peace and focus, right? And the piece beyond that is creativity, because once we live from that level of creativity, we can actually start changing things dramatically. So create a future? I'd say yes. For people, for corporations, and for cultures. And by that I mean cultures within organizations, cultures in society. So it doesn't have to be one thing or another, but where we all together can live differently. And my question is now the time? And I think if I ask the frog, he might say so. Thank you. Thanks.